characteristics between the 5 sense objects, we know they exist. Because beings of various sorts conceive and compute things in different ways, we know that there are minds and mental events. But since the Atman, self, has no characteristic, we know it does not exist. Question. However, there is breathing, which is a characteristic of the Atman, and also the looking straight ahead and sideways, life, mind, suffering or happiness, affection or aversion, the will, etc. Which are characteristics of the Atman. If there were no Atman, then who would have this breathing, this looking straight ahead or sideways, this life, this mind, this suffering or this happiness, this affection or this aversion, this will, etc.? Thus we know that there is an Atman, self, moving internally, and that the life and mind are properties of the Atman. If there were no Atman, one would be like an ox. Go without an ox herd. But since there is an Atman, it can govern the mind, penetrate things without any loss of attentiveness. If there were no Atman, who would direct the mind and experience unhappiness or happiness? If there were no Atman, one would be like a piece of wood, unable to distinguish between suffering and happiness, and it would be the same for affection or aversion, effort, etc. Nevertheless, since the Atman, self, is subtle, it cannot be cognized by the 5 sense organs, and it is by these characteristics that we know it exists. Answer. But all these characteristics are characteristics of the consciousness. It is because there is consciousness that there is breathing, looking straight ahead or sideways, life, etc. And when the consciousness leaves the body, all of that disappears. According to your concept of an eternal and omnipresent Atman, the corpse itself should still possess respiration, the ability to look straight ahead and sideways, life, etc. Furthermore, breathing, etc. are material dharmas moving on the wind of the mind. These are characteristics of consciousness and not characteristics of the Atman. As for life, which is a formation dissociated from mind, this also is a characteristic of consciousness. Question. When one enters into the absorption without mind and possibly one sleeps without dreaming, the breathing continues and life continues. How can you say that breathing and life are characteristics of consciousness? Answer. Although consciousness is temporarily suspended in the absorption without mind, shortly thereafter it must necessarily recur, for it does not leave the body. The time of duration of consciousness is long. The time when it disappears is short. This is why breathing and life are characteristics of consciousness. When a man goes out for a walk, we cannot say that his house is without an owner. Sadness and happiness, affection and aversion, will, etc. are associated with the mind, mutual conditions and accompanying the mind. When mind exists, they exist. When mind does not exist, they do not exist. This is why these are characteristics of consciousness and not characteristics of the Atman. Furthermore, supposing the Atman, self, did exist, it would be either eternal or non-eternal. But, as is said, if the Atman, self, were eternal, there would be no new existence. Eternal and without birth. It would also be without deliverance. It would also be infallible and inactive. This is why we should know that there would be neither sinner nor sin, nor any object to be sensed. To abandon the me and the mine is then to attain nirvana. But if there really were an Atman, we would be unable to reject the idea of me. If the Atman, self, were non-eternal, it ought to perish with the body. Like water rushing down from a high cliff. There would no longer be either sin or merit. See above p. 735f. What has been said in the chapter on Dhanaparamita about the Atman, the cognizing or non-cognizing subject, and the active or non-active subject. Since we cannot discover the characteristics of the Atman, we know that the Atman, self, is absent in all dharmas. Since we know that there is no Atman, self, in the dharmas, we cannot conceive the idea of Atman. Since there is no Atman, there cannot be an idea of Atmya, the idea of things belonging to the Atman. When the Atman, self, and the Atmya have disappeared, there is no longer any bondage, and when there is no longer any bondage, that is nirvana. This is why the yogin should cultivate the concept of non-self. IV. Links between impermanence, suffering and non-self. Question. Impermanence, suffering and non-self are one single thing or they are three things? If they are only one thing, we should not speak of three. If they are three things, why did the Buddha identify them by saying, that which is impermanent is suffering. That which is suffering is non-self? Answer. It is just one and the same thing, namely, the correct grasping of impure dharmas, but, since the points of view differ, there are three distinct terms. 1. Anityasamjna is associated with the aspect of impermanence. Duhkhasamjna is associated with the aspect of suffering. Anatmasamjna is associated with the non-self aspect. 2. Anitya does not penetrate into the threefold world. Duhkha makes known the defects of the threefold world. Anatman is rejection of the world. 3. Anitya produces the mind of disgust. Duhkha produces fear. Anatman tears up in order to liberate. 4. Concerning anitya, the Buddha said, the five aggregates of attachment are impermanent. Concerning dukkha, the Buddha said, that which is impermanent is suffering. Concerning anatman, the Buddha said, that which is suffering is non-self. 5. Concerning anitya, the Buddha spoke of the destruction of the five aggregates of attachment. Concerning dukkha, the Buddha said that it pierces the heart like an arrow. Concerning anatman, the Buddha spoke of rejection. 6. Concerning anitya, he said that it destroys desire. Concerning dukkha, he said that it destroys pride of self. Concerning anatman, he said that it destroys wrong views. 7. Anitya dispels the view of eternalism. Dukkha dispels the view in which there is the happiness of nirvana in the present lifetime. Anatman dispels any possibility of attachment. 8. Anitya is addressed to those who are attached to permanent things. Dukkha is addressed to those who imagine a possibility of happiness. Anatman is addressed to those who imagine a stable self. Anitya, dukkha and anatman are one notion with three different aspects. The notion of non-self takes as its object the multiplicity of things. See what was said with regard to the notion of suffering. V. The concept of revulsion toward food. When one notices that food arises from disgusting causes and conditions, this is the notion of revulsion toward food. Thus, meat comes from sperm, blood and urine. It is the seat of pus and worms. Ghee, milk and curdled milk, products of a transformation of blood, are nothing but rottenness. The cook also adds to it his sweat and all kinds of dirt. When food is put into the mouth, the throat secretes disgusting saliva that runs down from two channels, joins with the mucus, and then produces flavor. The food is thus formed like vomit, where it is solidified by the earth element, moistened by the water, stirred by the wind and cooked by the fire. In the